All right, everyone, we're going to finish up talking about responsive design. So, at least, with theory. So, a lot of what we do is not about me teaching you new concepts. It's more about me teaching you how to use what I've already taught you and how to use it in a way that can make your work, your websites or web pages work among different devices. Okay. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about the concept of Flexbox, okay? And I want to talk about Flexbox real quick. So let's just kind of look at something I did here. I just kind of want to show you the difference, okay? So here I have this navigation bar, which I've set up as a nav tag, and it has a bunch of hyperlinks in it, okay? And at the moment, I've set this up as a grid, okay? And if you take a look at what I did, I set it up as a grid and I set it up as a 5-column grid. Okay, so each column should be about 20% of the page, give or take. So if I preview 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And you can take a look. And let's just take a look at this. And if I click on the grid, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And that works. And we also talked about a flex box. Okay, a flex box is a flexible box where when you turn something into a flex box, all of its direct children become what are called flex items. Okay, what is a flex item? Well, it's part of the flex box. And defaultly, what Flexbox will do is it'll take all of its children and just display them, one after each other. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and I'm actually going to turn this off. And this is what it would look like by default, where it has all of my items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're kind of close to each other right now, so that you can actually Flexbox accepts what's called a gap, and you could put a gap in here if you wanted to. I'm using rems as a flexible unit here, and I could separate them. But a lot of time what people will use is this justify content. Remember, justify content takes the content and it distributes it among the Flexbox. Now, the Flexbox can either go horizontally or a row, which is the default, or it can go vertically as what's referred to as a column. Okay, right now, I haven't set it as a column, so it's going as a row. And so justify content, I could, we've talked about this before, and you can go back and look at the Flexbox, video that we did, where this would be, start is the default and it's at the start or the beginning. I can also put it at the end. Or if I want to distribute them, I can use space between. Okay, what that should do is take however many items I have, which in this case is 5, it's going to put 1 at the beginning of the box, 1 at the end, and distribute the others equally. Okay, and so what's interesting about this, so one, it's flexible, which is in the name itself, so it doesn't, if I make my page bigger or smaller, it does resize itself relatively easily. Now, technically, so does the grid. Now, here's where the two might differ, okay? You have to understand, and this is kind of a more advanced idea, that when you create websites, most websites, as the developer, once you create the website for a client, you are sort of handing it off to them, and they may add or subtract content, okay? So, this gets into most clients prefer what's called a content management system, also known as a CMS system. Examples of CMS systems would be like WordPress or Wix, or no, not Six, but Wix, Squarespace, Webflow, there's others with these, Shopify. These are all popular CMS systems. One thing that CMS systems do is they let people who don't really understand HTML and CSS be able to add HTML. So in other words, if I use WordPress or Wix, I can add navigational items really easily without having to really understand HTML. I'll use the interface, and when I add a navigational item, it'll actually add an A tag within the nav tag that's in the page. And that's how these mostly work. Most of the time, the people who are working with the CM, with the website, they don't really necessarily understand HTML and CSS, but they understand how to use the interface of WordPress or Wix or Squarespace or whatever it is. Okay. So in the future, what if you were to take this to the next step, what you would actually probably do is you would create what's called a theme, usually a theme for the content management system. All right. And like I said, the thing about it is you don't technically know how many items there are. Maybe the client wants to remove one of the items. Maybe they don't sell books anymore, or maybe they want to add items, right? So let's watch what happens with my grid system here when I add an item. Okay. So when I go back and I refresh, the next one just goes to the next line because, well, there's 6 items, but I said there's only 5 columns. So this has to go to the next line. Like I would actually have to go back and rewrite the CSS. And the thing about it is a lot of clients, they're not going to know how to do that, or they're going to call you. And it's like, do you want to waste your time fixing one line of code, to turn this into 6 columns? Probably not. But with Flexbox will automatically reset the size and add items so they're all within the same line. So for instance, if I come into here and I add an item, see how quickly that added that and everything just readjusted? Or, once again, I'm just going to make another line. And let's refresh. So once again, why is this useful? Well, it's keeping my design flexible, but it's also readjusting itself on the fly, which is really helpful when we don't necessarily know how many items we're going to have, okay, or if that number is going to change. All right, here's another way we might want to use Flexbox. Okay, so here's what we're going to build. I'm going to build something that starts off as 3 columns. And then it's going to, when the page gets smaller, it breaks into 2 columns. And not only does it break into 2 columns, one column automatically is going to just become sort of a column span, as we would say in grids, and then just become a 1 column for really small designs. Now, we've learned how to do this for grids, which requires using media queries. But another solution you could do if you wanted to do it would be to use Flexbox for this. Okay. Now the technique's a little different. So let me show you how it might work. So here's my page. 3 states. Each state is in, each section is a state. The states are inside of a container with a class of container on it. Okay. What I'm going to do is let's just say display flex. Okay. What that's going to do is take everything inside and try to adjust it for 1 row. Okay. And so essentially what's going on here is Flexbox looked at the content in the section and figured out how wide it should be. And then it kind of so you can see that not every column is getting exactly the same width. Okay. Now, this kind of works at a large size like this, but when we start getting smaller, this is becoming an issue because this is just really hard to read. This is difficult to read. So how can I fix this? Well, let's do something called flex wrap. Okay. What this allows you to do is have the content go underneath each other. Okay. Now, at first, it's actually going to do something a little different than what we think it will do. So actually what's happening is now these lines are going because I have so much content, it's kind of wrapping and causing, this where it's going all the way. And so, I end up having these sort of 3 vertical columns, which is not what I want. I still wanted to have 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. So how can I fix that? Well, what we can do is I'm gonna give each container or each child a specific width, okay? So right now it's allowing it to grow all the way from one side to the other, which means there's no room for anything else. So I need to actually, what's the word? I need to set a width, okay? And this is what's called a flex basis. And I'm gonna set a flex basis of, oh, I don't know, 40 rem. Let's try that. It's a little too big, maybe 30, 25, 28, 27 rem. There you go. Okay, so that's pretty good. We want to take a look at what, at least at this size, 27 rem is, so you give me a width. It's not giving me what, no dimensions. I can look over here. Looks like the width is 432. Okay. At least so at this size, that's what 27 rems is. Now, the thing about it is I still have all this empty space here, and it would be nice if these can actually kind of adjust themselves like they do naturally. So once you start adding a flex basis, they don't do that. So we can actually do what's called a flex grow, and we can turn it on. And what flex grow means is that if there's any empty space, it's going to add it so that they go all the way to the edge. Oops, let me save. All right, so now these are growing all equally. Now, what's going to happen is when there's not enough space for each section because of the flex basis I gave it, which is about 432, give or take, it's going to break on its own and go to the next line. Not only does it do that, it automatically kind of does this column span, which you may like or not like. If you don't like it, then maybe you want to use grids instead of Flexbox. But some people might like this so that it doesn't just form this very grid-like kind of, you could also do this with grids. You just have to apply it. You can easily do this using grid column with media queries, but this kind of does it automatically. And then as this gets smaller, once again, it's going to break and it's kind of becoming, so without using media queries, I'm setting up kind of this nice, responsive, flexible design. Okay. So use whichever method works for you. Okay. And always test it. I was looking on a channel website and saw some bad, like the website looked good on desktop and it looked horrible on my mobile phone. And I think I might gotta write them and be like, you need to fix this. Okay. All right. So last thing I'm going to talk about is we talked about media queries, right? And when we set up these media queries, they were always based on the width of the page, but technically that's not the only thing that we can do. So what I have here is you can actually check to see whether the browser is in, what orientation is it? Orientation means, is it in landscape where it's wider than it is tall, or is it in portrait mode where it's taller than it is wide? Okay, so essentially the browser can tell whether it's in landscape or portrait mode. The reason why this is important is when it's in landscape, it's probably on a desktop, or, it might be someone using it like this, where they're, people tend to use that for like videos, like on YouTube or, like Netflix or something like that. Portrait mode is what people typically use when they're viewing their smartphone like this. So if they're on like a news site or some other type of app, or, if they're in portrait mode, chances are they're probably either on a tablet or they're probably on a smartphone. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to set this, set it so that if I'm in landscape mode, which means wider than it is tall, let's change the background color and let's make it orange. And if it's in portrait mode, let's just set it to blue. Okay, so I'm going to preview this. So it's in landscape because it's wider than it is tall. So it goes to orange. Okay. Let's, another thing you can do while you're in responsive mode is there's, at least in Chrome, there's this option here called rotate, which lets you switch easily between landscape and portrait mode. So right now I'm in landscape, now I'm in portrait, landscape, portrait, landscape, portrait. Okay. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, I want this to appear in landscape, but not in portrait. So in portrait, I'm going to turn this off. So let's select it using my little class I added. I'm just going to say display none. Okay. And for portrait mode, or sorry, in landscape mode, portrait should be off. So let's set that display none. Okay. I'm going to refresh. So landscape mode, only the landscape mode text appears. And when I flip it in portrait mode, only the portrait mode appears. How would you use this in real life? Well, you know, chances are if you're in landscape mode, you're probably, you probably don't need that little hamburger menu or something like that because you're probably on a desktop computer. So maybe you set that to be something that's going to cause it to, you know, remove or not remove the hamburger item. There might just be something that if your page is wider, you know, it creates a better effect. So, you know, maybe it's an aspect ratio or the size of an image. You may want to change that between landscape mode and portrait mode. Okay. All right. The last thing we're going to talk about is this thing called dark mode. Okay. Dark mode's a newer idea. It's been around for a couple of years now. So what dark mode is that many operating systems, whether it's Windows or Mac OS X or Android or iPhone, they allow you to display your content, your computer in what's called dark mode. Okay. So I'm on a Mac. So if I go under general, I can do it up here. Right now I'm in light mode. I'm going to switch it to dark mode. As you can see, everything basically turns, you know, by default, I have a white background with dark text. When I switch to dark mode, I have a, you know, dark background with white text. Okay. Why do people want to use this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, some people just like it from a, you know, from a visual standpoint. Two, for some people, the contrast is better. So it's actually easier for them to read in dark mode than it is in light mode. And also, another reason, this is more of a tech reason than an aesthetic reason, is when you're in dark mode, you typically use less energy for your device. Okay, so why is this really helpful? Well, you know, if you're using a desktop computer, chances are it's plugged in all of the time because most people typically do that. But if you're using a device like a smartphone or a tablet, you know, and you're on the go, it's not plugged in all the time. So if someone is running their smartphone and they're running around town or whatever, you know, like I do this, I have it in dark mode mostly because it helps maintain the battery life so that my battery doesn't die as quickly. Okay. So what does that have to do with CSS? Well, right now I have this is exercise 8. And I have this web page here. Okay. And as you can see, I'm using very bright colors, very, you know, lots of yellow and, you know, orange here, right? That kind of thing. What I want to do is when the user puts their computer, their operating system in dark mode, I would like the website to reflect that. Why would we want to do that? Well, if you think about it, if you have a website with a lot of bright colors, but the user's in dark mode to try to save energy, well, you're not helping them, right? You're deliberately kind of not helping them. So what we could do is I'm going to set up a dark mode here so that if someone puts my web page into, or puts their computer in a dark mode, the web page will reflect that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is say at media, but rather than using a width or portrait or whatever orientation, we're going to use what is referred to as color. What is it? Color scheme, prefers color scheme. That's it. Okay. And then we're going to put dark. Dark is dark mode. So what this means is whatever you put here, that is what's going to be used CSS wise when you put your computer, or when the person puts their computer into dark mode. Okay. So right now it's like, well, my background's really bright, right? So maybe it would be better to use, I'm going to set the background color to black. Okay. So right now, body set to yellow. Let's set that to black. Okay. Oops. I don't know what happened there. Oops, I closed it. There we go. I also going to change. So this div, this is this background color here. I'm going to make it kind of like a dark gray. So let's take that div background color and dark gray. I'm going to use dark slate gray. And it's a little too bluish. Let's just drag it over here. Another thing I'm going to do is the text is really dark. Why don't we change it to like a brighter color? So I'm going to set that over here to white. Okay. So I'm going to save and I'm going to refresh my page. Now, at the moment, you're not seeing a change because I haven't actually changed you have to change whether it's in dark mode or light mode on the operating system. So I have to do that to the computer itself. So I'm going to go here. Let's go back to general and I'm going to switch this to dark mode. Okay. So this is light mode and this is dark mode. Okay. So, you know, if my computer was already in dark mode, I might prefer a website that kind of goes along with it. Like I said, for me, the reason I do it is to save, energy when I'm reading articles and such. And so this would help with that. Okay. If you want to set, you can also set a prefers color scheme light. That would be for whatever you want to have. In light mode. Okay. Which for now, maybe I'll just put this into that. Okay. Light mode, dark mode. Oops, I forgot. Oh, whoops, the width shouldn't just be in light mode. Yeah, so this stuff I'd actually probably want in like sort of just a regular, just so that, and I could fix that. This is why it's always good to test things. Okay, there you go. All right, so try that out. That was 5 through 8.